back towards slavery means. So it's going to be very interesting. They want to come in, I'll bring. Part 33, we're getting to it. We're at 738, so we're getting to 800 pages. I really like the other two chapters about how he like put the education and how bad it was to even set up those things, and how much they stole from the educational system, you know. I'll be right back and we'll start reading. Okay. Here we go. Let's start reading. All right. All right. Towards slavery. Let's find out what this chapter is going to be about. How civil war in the South began again, indeed, have ever ceased, and how black Prometheus bound to the rock of ages by hate, hurt, and humiliation, has his vital eaten out as they grow, yet lives and fights. It must be remembered and never forgotten that the Civil War of the South, which overthrew Reconstruction, was a determined effort to reduce black labor in as nearly as possible to the condition of the unlimited exploitation in building a new class of capitalists, and on this foundation, the wage of the black worker, despite the war amendments, was to be reduced to the level of bare subsistence by taxations, peonage, caste, and every method of discrimination. This program had to be carried out to open defiance of the clear letter of the law. The lawlessness in the South since the Civil War was varied in its phases. First, it was that kind of disregard for law which follows all war. Then it became a labor war, an attempt on the part of the impoverished capitalists and landholders to force laborers to work on the capitalist's own terms, on the capitalist's own terms. From this, it changed to a war between laborers, black and white men, fighting for the same job. Afterwards, the white laborer joined the white landholders and capitalists and beat the black laborer into subjection through secret organizations and the rise of a new doctrine of race hatred. And that's what and there you go. There's a little bit more of like some ground roots about like how black and white laborers were fairly deposed to each other. The white people went for the so-called false consciousness of like taking up for the landholders. It is always difficult to stop war, and doubly difficult to stop civil war. Inevitably, when men have long been trained to violence and murder, the habit projects itself into civil life after peace, and there is crime and disorder and social upheaval. As we who live in the backlash of the World War known too well, but in the case of civil war, where the contending parties must rest face to face after peace, there can be no quick and perfect peace. When to all this you add a servile and disadvantaged race who represents the cause of war and who afterwards are left near naked to their enemies, war may go on more secretly, more spasmodically, and yet as truly as before the peace. This was the case in the South after Lee's surrender. Emancipation loosened the finer feelings of some Southerners towards black people. They felt the fall of the burden and expressed it. The nightmare was at last over. They need no more apologies to the world for a system they were powerless to change or reconstruct. It had been changed, and they were glad. Yeah, do Davy Shark. But emancipation left the planters poor, with no method of earning a living except by exploiting black labor on their own remaining their land. This underlying economic urge was naturally far stronger than the philanthropic and motivated the mass of Southerners. Carl Schwartz said, "Some planters held back their former slaves on their plantations by brute force. Armed bands of white men patrolled the county roads by driving back black people wandering about. Dead bodies of murdered black people were found on and near the highway and byways. Gruesome reports came from the hospitals, reports of men of color and women whose ears had been cut off, whose skulls had been broken by blows, whose bodies had been slashed by knives and lacerated by scourges. And a number of such cases, I had occasion to examine myself. A veritable reign of terror prevailed in many parts of the South." There you go. Yeah. Many testified that the Southern people seemed to have transferred their wrath at the federal government to people of color. The disorder and utter lack of control was widespread. Governor Sharkey of Mississippi found an unprecedented amount of lawlessness in 1866. Mr. Smitty's, a Southern white woman, tells of incidents in Mississippi involving both white and black people. At this time, incendiary fires were common. There was not much law in the land. We heard of the gin houses and cotton houses that were burned in all directions. One day, as Thomas came back from a business journey, the smoldering ruins of his gin house met his eyes. The building was itself valuable and necessary. Yeah. All the cotton that he owned was consumed in it. He had not a dollar. He had to borrow the money to buy the postage stamp, not only during this year, but during many years to come. It was a time of deepest gloom. Thomas had been wounded in the bottom of the inaffectionate heart by a petrified of a white man who had brought this on his house. In the midst of the grinding poverty that now fell in full force on him, he heard of the reckless extravagance of this man on the money that should have been used to meeting these debts. Bands of Confederate soldiers roamed in some states. There have been a number of complaints made to Captain Galvin's by citizens of Wayne, Greene, and Sampson County. Numerous robberies and acts of violence by the band of late rebels, soldiers who are inhabitants of Wayne County. They are said to be headed by one Frank Cooley. Some 8 weeks ago, several returned rebel soldiers from Pitt County went into the village of Washington and commenced shooting and beating Union men. Several assaults were made, and at least one Union man was publicly whipped in the street, and some black people were wounded. One of the party was badly wounded by his person whom they attacked. On their return, they met on the public highway of a black person. It just says highway and then uses the N-word with O at the end. They first castrated him and afterwards murdered him in cold blood. In Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, it was said in 1866, the life of black people is not worth much there. I've seen one who was shot in the leg while he was riding a mule because the ruffian thought it was more trouble. It more trouble to ask him to get off the mule than to shoot him. There is a very large class of such people in Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana. I had expected to find Texas in a much worse condition, but I found it much safer than in Alabama and Mississippi, particularly in Alabama. The people have been rendered desperate. The corpse of the past year have been very poor. The rust of the army worn by destroyed their cotton crops, and there is much want and suffering among the people. An argument frequently employed in justifying the outrage of the freemen as that the whites were goaded into it by the evils of black domination. The arguments hold good in part, but only in part, for unhappily, the outrage were committed before the suffrage was conferred upon black people, before such a step was even favored by any considerable number of Northern people. Clara Barton, who visited Andersonville, Georgia in 1866, tells the story of a wife of color of 18 whom her husband, a blacksmith, brought to her walking 3 to 40 miles. I took his wife into my tent and examined her back. She was a young, bright woman of color, a little darker than he, with a fair, patient face, with nothing sulky in her looks. I found across her back 12 lashes and gashes, partly healed and partly not, some of them cut into the bone. She must have been whipped with a lash half as large as my little fingernail. It may have been larger, and one of these lashes had from 8 to 10 inches in length. The flesh had been cut completely out most of the way. It had been a curling whip. It had curled around her arms, cut inside the arm, over the back, and the same on the other side. There were 12 of those long lashes, partly healed and partly not. She did not bear her clothing on her at that time, except thrown loosely over her shoulders. She had got strong enough so as to be able to walk, but she was feeble and must have been unable to work before that occurred. She was in no condition to work. She had been, quote, backed and gagged by her employer, thrown on her face and lashed on her back, so that when her husband found her, he said she was, quote, a gore of blood. The offense was that in the last months of pregnancy, she had proved unable to do the task of spinning which was given her. There was in those southern states which I have visited for some year after the war and up to the year 1868, or in some cases 1870, much disorder and a condition of lawlessness towards black people, to dispossession greatest in the more distant and obscure regions, to trample them underfoot, to deny them equal rights, and to injure or kill them on slight or no provocation. The tremendous change in the social arrangement of the Southern whites had suffered a defeat which was sore to bear. And on top of this, they saw their slaves, their most valuable and cherished property, taken away and made free. And not only free, but their political equals. One needs to go into the far South to know that this really meant, what this really meant, and what deep resentment and irritation is inevitably bred. All right. The unrest and bitterness of post-war lawlessness was gradually transmuted into an economic pressure. Systematic efforts was made by owners to put black people to work, an equally determined effort by the poor whites to keep him from work, which competed with them or threatened their future work and income. Cotton and other crops were high in price, and hard work would soon restore something of the losses of the war. The planters offered the ex-slave, therefore, a labor contract, and were surprised when he refused. He had to refuse. The plantation laborer, under the conditions offered, would still be a slave, with small chance to rise to positions of independent farmer. or even a free modern laborer. On the other hand, the poor whites were determined to keep black people from access to the richer and better lands from which slavery had driven the white peasants. A third cornered battle ensued, and increased lawlessness, aggression. Reoccurrent crops failure due to the weather made more trouble, and at the same time, the wars of Europe, the 7 Weeks' War and the Franco-Prussian War, disrupted civilization. In such an economic revolution, the cost of change and uplift ought to fall on the community, the nation, and the government. The plantation land should have gone to those who worked it, and the former owners should have been compensated in some part for the lost investment made with the social sanctions of the nation. To this should have been added economic opportunity and access to the land for the poor whites. But such a possible outcome was frustrated by the economic selfishness of the North and by the intransigent attitude of the vast majority of the planters. They did not believe in freedom for black people. They sought to frustrate it by law, force, and deliberate cheating, and by arrogant demands of economic leases and political power, such as no sane nation could grant. This result was federal Reconstruction, a lawlessness which in 1865 and 1868 was still spasmodic and episodic, now became organized, and its real underlying industrial causes obscured by political excuses and race hatred, using the technique of mass and midnight murder, and South became widely organized aggression upon black people. When Congress intervened by its Reconstruction measures to defeat the reactionary program of the South, there swept over that sanctions a crime storm of devastating fury. Lawlessness and violence filled the land, and terror stalked abroad by day, and it burned and murdered by night. The southern states had actually relapsed into barbarism. During the period, a new generation was conceived and born to the South of both races that was literally conceived in lawlessness, born into crime-producing conditions. Lawlessness was its inheritance, and the red splotch of violence is its birthmark. Armed guerrilla warfare killed thousands of black people. Political riots were staged. Their cause or occasions were always obscured, their results always certain. 10 to 100 times as many black people were killed as whites. Then differences began to arise. Instead of driving black people to work, bands of poor whites began to drive them from work. Private vengeance was taken upon preposterous and hardworking black people. A number of black people were employed in building the airline railroads between Atlanta and Charlotte. Disguised men went there, took black people and whipped them and forced them back to the farms to work. They were receiving wages for working on the railroads. A man of Ohio lived in Clarendon County in South Carolina, had his stocks in business amount to $40,000 a year, entirely destroyed. Entirely destroyed. Just 3 of us, okay. There were a good many industrious men who, if they could get a start, would make crops of their own and become independent farmers. In every such case where men of color could bring proper recommendations thereof evidence of industry, he would take advances to them as well as to white men. The farmers about complained that in this way he was taking away laborers and making black people independent farmers. They whipped him, ruined his business, and drove him out of the state. The Chickasaw County, Alabama, men of color, Robert Fullerlove, lived. Masked men shot into his house and burned it. He and his neighbors were killed and driven away. I have 400 acres of land. I have about 20 head of cattle, little and big. I have an oxen team, and in the lots of cattle there are 7 milk cows. I have corn and fodder and hogs. I had a very fine crop of cotton planted and was going over it when this last raid happened at my house. I have lost my crop entirely, and it isn't worthwhile for me to stay. I'm a hard-working man, and I love it that I have worked for and earned. August Blair of Huntsville, Alabama, was a hard-working old black man who had stayed at home during the war and helped to take care of the little white chickens. The Triple K came to his house, seized his son, and beat and maltreated him. He got so he could get out about a little. I hired a wagon of fetched him. I hired a wagon and fetched him here. But directly he came here, he was taken down with a hemorrhage that came from stamping him on the stomach and breast. They stamped him all over the stomach and breast. In 2 weeks after he was examined in the courtroom, there he died. Everybody that saw him said he couldn't live, and they were surprised that he lived so long. I had the doctor to tend to him. I owe $45 to Dr. Henry Benford. He asked me for the money on Saturday. After all this was done, I knew every man of them, and I came here and made complaint. Mr. Wagger assisted me in Jim Common of Athens and told me to have them arrested before the grand jury. I had a good deal of property down there. I had 30 heads of hogs and 4 bales of cotton. I had 4 bales of gin and fetched my cotton there and sold it. They looked for me to go back. I left my wife and children there. I didn't want to go away. I hadn't done anything, but I believed that they could have treated me just the same way, and I went away. I left 30 heads of hogs and 1 good milk cow, 4 bales of cotton, and my corn in the field. Jim Common told me to sue for it. I went down there, and all my things were gone. These happenings were not confined to particular regions. They spread all over the South. In 1866, the first church of people of color was opened by American Missionaries Associations at Mississippi, Tennessee. It was burned with all the churches of color in Memphis in the riot that year. In the 18th month, ending June 30th, 1867, General Canby reported 197 murders and 548 acres of aggravated assaults, cases of aggravated assaults in North and South Carolina. In reference to South Carolina, the report of a joint select committee of the 2 houses of Congress in 1872 contains such a mass of revolting details that cannot decide where to begin their citation or where to stop. Murders or attempts to murders were numerous. Whippings are without number. Probably the most cruel and cowardly of these last were the whippings of Elias Hill, when he was a man of color who had from infancy been dwarfed in legs and arms. He wasn't able to use either, but he possessed an intelligent mind. He learned to read, and he acquired an unusual amount of knowledge for one of his circumstances. He was a Baptist preacher. He was highly respected for his upright character. He was eminently religious and was greatly revered by the people of his own race. It was on this ground that he was visited by the Triple K, brutally beaten and dragged from his house into the yard, where he was left in the cold at night, unable to walk or crawl. The report from South Carolina tells of 97 black people killed and 146 shot and whipped. These are riots because of the arming of black people. White farmers who were displaced as tenants attacked the black tenants. Black churches are burned. In one community, 4/5 of of the black men were sleeping out in the woods. Gins and gin houses are burned in retaliation by black people. Women of color were whipped and raped by whites. In some cases, the white landholders tried to protect black people, while the irresponsible poor whites led the attack. Another community, 11 murders and more than 600 whippings have gone unnoticed, while there were 7 cases of incendiary burnings. Black artisans are stopped from following their trade, and the antagonism between poor whites and black people grows. 9 black foundrymen were beaten and blacksmiths whipped. In Edgefield and Lorenz counties, South Carolina, they were organized bands of regulators, armed men, who make it their business to traverse their counties and maltreat black people without any avowed definite purposes in view. They treat black people, in many instances, in the most horrible and atrocious manner, even to maintain them, cutting their ears off, etc. In one's case, 2 citizens of one of these counties testified against these parties and were instantly compelled to leave the country, barely escaping with their lives. The citizens are bound in honor by the understanding or compact among them not to testify against these regulators, so that it is impossible to get evidence against them unless black people gives it. The report of the Triple K investigation, published in 1871, said of South Carolina that the 9 counties covered by investigation for a period of approximately 6 months, the Triple K lynched and murdered 35 men, whipped 262 men and women, otherwise outraged, shot, mutilated, burned out, etc. 101 persons. It committed 2 cases of sex offenses against black women. During this time, black people killed 4 men, beat 1 man, committed 16 other outrages, but no cases of torture. No cases is found of a white woman seduced or raped by a black person. The reason given for the Triple K outrage was significantly varied. The victims should suffer in revenge for killing, and for some cases of arson. They were Republicans. They were radical. They had attempted to hold elections. They were carrying arms. They were quilt N-words. They were damn N-words. They boasted that they would own land. They should be made to recant Republican principles, and there should be desired information. In Georgia, 1868, the disturbance are reported in the Northwest section, where the poor whites are the majority. Black people were whipped for debt, for associating with white women, and for trying to vote. In the Cotton Belt, where black people outnumbered whites, 3 white members of the legislature were killed, and there were insurrections and riots, culminating in the one at Camellia. In this case, 300 Republicans, mostly black people, with music and banners, were marching to hold a public meeting. They were met by the sheriff and told that they could not meet. A riot ensued. There 8 or 9 black people were killed, 24 and 20 of 40 were wounded. No whites were killed. The black Secretary of State, Johannes Gibbs, in Florida, when called before the Committee of Congress in 1871, reported 153 murders in Jackson County in that state. Conditions in Texas were particularly bad. In 1869, in 30 counties, there was no civil government. In others, very imperfect organizations. During Sheridan's command of the state, there were 9 murders a month. If he owned both hell and Texas, Sheridan said upon one occasion, he would rent out Texas and leave in hell, a statement which was repeated over the country for a generation. Benjamin F. Wade added to this that he was told by a native, quote, all that Texas needs to make it a paradise is water and good society. Yes, answered Wade. That's all they need in hell. The committee of the Constitutional Convention in 1868 on partial return said that 1,035 men have been murdered in Texas since the close of the war, and a federal attorney said that the number might have been 2,000. The Secretary of State reports to the Texas Senate that 105 homicides had taken place in the 2 years ending in 1870. He believed that if all the facts were known, the total would be 1,500. In 1870, after a new state government was organized, it was officially reported that 2,970 persons charged with murder were evading arrest in the state, and 2 of 7 murders were often attributed to the same individuals. From war, turmoil, poverty, forced labor, and economic rivalry of labor groups, there came again in the South the domination of the secret order, which systemized the efforts to subordinate black people. The method of force, which hides itself in secrecy, is a method as old as humanity, kind of thing that men are afraid or ashamed to do openly. And by day, they accomplish secretly, masked and at night. The method has certain advantages. It uses fear to cast out fear. It dares things at which open method hesitates. Hold on a second real quick. Hold on a second, trying to do something. Oh my gosh.
What if?
Okay. Just wanted to, sorry everybody. Okay. It uses fear to cast out fear. It dares things that which open method hesitates. It may with a certain impunity attack the high and the low. It might hesitate on no outrage of maiming or murder. It shields itself in the mob mind, and then throws all over the veil a darkness which becomes glamour. It attracts people who otherwise could not be reached. It harnesses the mob. How is it that men who want certain things done by brute force so often depend upon the mob? Totally depravity, human hate, and oh my gosh, I can't say this word. Schadenfreude do not explain fully the mob spirit in America. Before the wide eyes of the mob is ever the shape of fear. Back of the withering yelling, the wreathing, yelling, crude-eyed demons who break, destroy, maim, and lynch, and burn at the stake, is a not, large or small, a normal human being, and these human beings are desperately afraid of something. Of what? Of many things, but usually of losses, usually of losing their jobs, being declassed, degraded, or actually disgraced, of losing their hopes, their savings, the plans of their children, of the actual pangs and of hunger, of dirt, of crime, and of all this, most ubiquitous is modern industrial society, is that fear of unemployment. It is its nucleus of ordinary men that continually give the mob its initial and awful epithets. Around the nucleus, to be sure, gather snowball-wise all manners of flute sounds. I'm gonna look up that word. No idea what that means. FLOTMAS. Ooh. Oh yeah, I did it wrong. Flotsam. Floating wreckage, cargo, or debris from a ship found on the water. Okay. Flotsam. Filth and human garbage, and every loudness of alcohol and current fashions. But all this is the horrible covering of this inner nucleus of fear. How then is the mob to be met and quelled? If it represents public opinion, even passionate public opinion, it cannot permanently be put down by police, which public opinion appoints and pays. Three methods of quelling the mob are at hand. The first, by proving to its human, honest nucleus that the fear is false, ill-grounded, unnecessary. Or secondly, it is fear is true or apparently a partially true, by attacking the fearful thing openly, either by organized police power or by frank civil war, as did Mussolini and George Washington. Or thirdly, by a secret, hidden, and underground ways of method, and the triple K. Mussolini. Yeah, that's Mussolini. Why do we not take the first way? Because this is the world that believes in war and ignorance, and has no hope in our day to realizing an intelligent majority of men and peace on earth. There are many exceptions, but in general, it is true that there is sacredly a bishop of Christendom, a priest in the church, a president, governor, mayor, or legislator in the United States, a college professor, or a public school teacher who does not in the end stand by war or ignorance as a main method for the settlement of our pressing human problems. And this despite the fact that they may deny it with their months every day. But here again, open civil war is difficult, costly, and hard to guide. The right towards which it aims must be made obvious, even if it is wrong. In 1918, in order to win the war, we had to make Germans into Huns. The order to win the South had to make black people into thieves, monsters, and idle and unintelligent people. Tomorrow we must make Latins, Southeastern Europeans, Turks, and others, Asiatics, into actual lesser breed without the law. Some seem to see today Antichrist in Catholicism and in Jewish international plotters of the protocol, and in, quote, the rising tide of color, a threat to all civilization, the human culture. Even if these things were true, it would be difficult to bring the truth clearly before the ignorant mob and guide it towards the overthrow of evil. But if these be half true and wholly false, the mob can only be stirred to action by wholesale lying, and this is difficult and costly and may be successfully answered, or by secret underground whispering, the methods of night and masks, and the physiology of vague and unknown ill, and a psychology of value of vague and unknown ill. Don't know this word. Look up this word too. Welcome in, everybody. Thanks for passing by. One of the two. INNUE. Here it is.
Innuendo.
Oh, it's innuendo. Cannot be answered, for it is not openly published. Secret organizations had long been a method of fastening dictatorship upon the South. It was seen in Louisiana early in the 19th century and helped in the annexation of Texas. It was widespread in Kansas. Senator Douglas called the whole session a movement, quote, the result of an enormous conspiracy. Charles Sumner said, quote, not in all history, ancient and modern, is there any record of conspiracy so vast, so wicked, ranging over such spaces, both in time and history. The evidence taken by the Congressional Committee, which visited Kansas in 1856, furnished the most contestable proof of the power and extent of those oath-bound orders. The different lodges were connected together by the effective organization, embraced great numbers of the citizens of Missouri, and was extended into other slave states and into the territory. To avow purpose was not only to extend slavery into Kansas, but also into other territories of the United States. This dangerous society was controlled by men who avowed their purpose to extend slavery at all hazards. The renewed used the secret orders to fasten the dictatorship of property over labor upon the South began in New Orleans in 1865, when the rebel armies were disbanded and began to return to the cities. First, apparently, appeared the Southern Cross, determined to drive out the new Northern capitalists and reduce black people to slavery. Governor Wells said in 1866, quote, "Should the secret associations now organized rapidly be able to regain the ascendancy which made it, quote, New Orleans, or living hell for years before the rebellion, I shudder at the consequences," end quote. Meantime, a larger and more exclusive secret order had been started in Tennessee, known as the Triple K. Tennessee, Alabama, Texas, Arkansas, North Carolina soon fell under its action by the same methods. The new technique of the plan solidified various projects and efforts and provided a new unity through emphasizing the importance of race. The race element was emphasized in order that property holders could get the support of the majority of white laborers and make it more possible to exploit black labor. But the race philosophy came as a new and terrible thing to make labor unity or labor class consciousness impossible. So long as the Southern whites, laborers, could be induced to prefer property to equality with black people, just so long as was the labor movement in the South made impossible. Some excuse the rise of the Triple K and the White League and the Knights of the White Camellia in the South, all white supremacist groups, with the plea that they were the answer to black suffrage and that the Union Leagues started among black people were the cause of secret orders among whites. There's no historical foundation for this. The Union League in the North was a movement of Northern white aristocracy, including most of the rich and well-to-do, against defeatism and the menace of the Copperhead. Its powerful and influential social clubs in New York, Philadelphia, and elsewhere existed to this day. The Union League's movement influenced the labor vote in the North. It came to the South with the carpetbaggers and used the Northern technique. It employed among black people some ceremonies of secrecy, but it never contemplated murder and force. But no stretch of the imagination could it be called the organization similar to or provocative to the Triple K. Writing to keep chat going. Thanks. The carpetbaggers organized black vote and offered them more in wages and privileges than the whites. The local answer of the planters in the free industrial democracy would have been to meet these offers by better ones. Oh gosh. They choose instead force and secret revolutions. It was not then the organization of Union Leagues that caused the Triple K. It was the determination to deprive black people to force of any real weapons for economic bargaining. Their use of the ballot from 1868 to 1872 aroused the property holders to a frenzy of protest, but it also attracted certain elements of white labor and bade fair with reform and efficiency to build the Southern Labor Party. There was but one way to bring up this threatening coalition. It was to unite poor and rich whites by the slobbleths of the race. And despite divergent economic interest, the work of secret orders in 1868 and 1872 frustrated any mass movement towards union and white and black labor. Before 1874, the turmoil of Louisiana blazed the way. The New Orleans riot in 1866, which stirred the nation and influenced the presidential election, was due primarily to the fact that the head of the secret order was also chief of police. The Knights of the White Camellia came, I don't even know if I'm saying it, came into proeminence after black enfranchisement and were especially aimed to excluding black people from voting by terrorism and killing of the leaders. The presidential election of 1868 spurred the planters and their allies to deliberate activity. They saw a chance to nullify the vote of black labor, unite with Northern Copperheads' democracy, and capture the government. Frank Bear egged them on to revolution. The testimony shows that over 2,000 persons were killed, wounded, and otherwise injured in Louisiana within the few weeks prior to the presidential election in November 1868. That half of the state was overrun by violence, and that midday raids, secret murders, and open riots kept the people in constant terror until the Republicans surrendered all claim. But the most remarkable case is that of St. Laundry, a planting parish on the river of Teach. Here, the Republicans had a registered majority of 1,071 votes. In the spring of 1868, they carried the parish by 678, and in the fall they gave Grant no vote, no one, while the Democrats cast 4,787, the full vote of the parish, for Seymour and Blair. Here occurred one of the bloodiest riots on record, in which the Triple K killed and wounded over 200 Republicans, hunting and chasing them for 2 days and nights through fields and swamps. 13 captives were taken from the jail and shot. A pile of 25 dead bodies was found half burned in the woods. Having conquered the Republicans and killed and driven off the white leaders, the Triple K captured the masses, marked them with badges and red flannel, enrolled them in clubs, made them vote the Democratic ticket, and then gave them the certificate of the fact. In the parish of St. Bernard, black people was killed. I don't know, no. Where was I at? A black mob killed a white man. 3 steamboats filled with armed ruffians left New Orleans for the scene of the riot. Before the trouble could be composed, a dozen or 15 men were slain. Frightful conditions prevailed up the Red River, surrounding Shreveport and Condeau and Bossier Parish, and trade centers for Texas, Arkansas, and the indigenous nation. And United States armed officers on duty in this place saw 2 or 3 men shot down in the streets in front of the store in which he sat. He picked up the bodies of 8 men who had been killed in one night. Never had he heard of anyone being punished for murder in that country. 120 corpses were found in the woods and were taken out of the Red River after a quote black hunt in Posner Parish. No, I don't want to co-host with you. Stop doing that. Okay. For 10 days prior to the election of November, the streets were filled with men carrying shotguns, rifles, pistols, and knives. A band of Sicilian cutthroats called the Innocent, made up largely of fruit dealers, fishermen, oystermen, and other elements drawn from the market, roamed the city, hunting black people. Soon no one could be found in the streets. Then the ruffians entered the houses to drive out black people, shot them like rabbits as they ran. Men of color feared to sleep 2 nights in the same place. This bloody club had 2,000 members. There were more than 70 other clubs in New Orleans, bearing such names as the Seymour Southrons, or the Seymour Infantes, or the Seymour Tigers, the Blair Knights, and the Swamp Fox Rangers, and the Hancock Club, and the Russian Guards. Their appearance in parades led to riots, in which many were killed and injured. Disorders extended to other parts of Louisiana. In 1 month, Said General Hatch of the Freedmen's Bureau, 297 persons were slain in the parishes adjacent to New Orleans. Jesus Christ. That's how they're controlling the black vote and everything. During the election time, the gun stores of New Orleans were thronged with buyers, and price of Colts and revolvers doubled. The local paper said, quote, "Thad Stevens is dead. The prayers of the righteous have at last removed the congressional curse. May, old Brownlow, Butler, and all such political monsters follow the examples of their illustrious predecessors." The coup d'etat failed, and the Reconstruction government was established. But although conditions during the next 2 years showed improvement, General Moore, in command in New Orleans, said in 1869 that the country around Winsboro and Franklin Parish was, quote, "infested by gangs of desperados and thieves," quote unquote, who totally defy the civil rights authorities. For I have seen the coming of the world. Okay. For all, I don't know what you mean. Did you say something before? No. Okay. All this was challenged to the North and to Democratic government. The response was only half-hearted. The North recoiled from force, and force alone. Oh, okay, thank you. Force alone could dislodge the planters and allied capitalists and firmly fasten labor governments on the South. The North hesitated. Did it want labor government in the South? Should black rule white, even if it could? The force of the 15th Amendment in federal law was passed on May 31st, 1970. After a long debate, there was an all-night session in the Senate, May 21st, conference between the two houses, and finally the bill became a law, May 31st. The law made minute provisions to protect by federal action all citizens in the civil and political rights guaranteed by the Constitution. It enumerated 26 misdemeanors, 5 felonies, and 87 crimes. The punishment varied from $500 fines and 1 year's imprisonment to $5,000 fines and 10 years imprisonment. It was the intention of the law to protect black people, and using his rights to vote and his protection was to carry out through federal officials. It was known that the Southern whites were keeping black people from voting by methods which local officials and state courts could not touch. Witnesses were afraid to testify. Juries did not return verdicts, even on clear evidence. Registration was hindered. Voters were bribed and intimidated. Black people and white men were killed. And the law brought the whole power of the government, militia, land, and naval forces, the courts to bear upon persons who, by bribery or threat, sought to influence the black vote, or to deprive him of political rights. Meantime, the Triple K organized in Tennessee in 1865 became widespread. That in 1871, Congress appointed a joint committee to investigate it. This committee investigated conditions from April 1871 to February 9th, 1872, and issued a voluminous report in 12 volumes covering most of the southern states. This formed a tremendous and invaluable picture of the situation in the South at the time. The federal election law was passed February 28th, 1871, which provided for a national registration of voters, a necessary and inevitable step to rescue national democracy from political particularism and possible fraud. Such a law is still needed and still lacking. President Grant was appealed to the March 1871 for military aid to suppress violence in South Carolina. He recommended legislation, and as a result, the Triple K enforced laws of April 20th, 1871 was passed. It strengthened the Act of 1871. It was designed to destroy conspiracy against the 14th and 15th Amendments. It empowered the president to suspend the right of habeas corpus, quote, when in his judgment the public safety shall require it, end quote. The president, by proclamation of May 3rd, 1871, called the attention of the nation to this act and said that it had been made necessary by persistent violations of rights of citizens of the United States. He recognized the possibility to place on him and did not wish to use this extraordinary power, but it was his duty to make it known that when it was necessary, he would use them. As a matter of fact, he only once suspended the right of habeas corpus in a case of certain lawlessness counties of South Carolina. The actual military forces at the disposal at this time were limited, amounted to only about 9,000 troops, or 1/3 of the army in the whole South. To emphasize this, his wish to be fair to the South, Grant urged the removal of all political disabilities from the former Confederates in December 1871. A bill for this purpose had passed the House, but failed in the Senate because Sumner tried to couple with it his Civil Rights Bill, and then the Northern Democrats voted against it. It finally passed Congress in May 1872 with the civil rights featured amended. Also, in 1872, the Triple K law expired by limitations and was not extended. Meantime, in Tennessee, North Carolina, and Texas, a right of habeas corpus had been suspended in the summer of 1870 by the governors. I gotta do a puzzle, everybody. Let's do the puzzle together. Yay, I did it right the first time. And in 1871, United States courts were filled with Triple K cases. In Mississippi, 640 persons were indicted under the enforcement law and 200 arrested, but not a single one convicted. President Grant declared that in some of the counties of the South Carolina, 2/3 of the whites were organized and armed. In all, during 1870 to 1895, 5,172 cases were tried in the South and 2,200 in the North. Of these, 5,046 were dismissed, 1,432 convicted, 903 acquitted. So basically, the testimony was overwhelming. By convictions was impossible in the South. With 1872, new forms of violence took the place of old intimidation, threats, and fraud. There were judicial discriminations, forced an actual civil war. Federal officials were kept busy, and the president tried in vain to execute the Force Act. The election of 1872 and the panic of 1873 charged the face of affairs. The labor governments built on black votes had kept Grant in office, since the only alternative offered black people was to vote for their own disenfranchisement. The Northern Reform movement had begun to unite itself with big businesses and superfinance, and to sympathize with the Southern planters. The planters had won this sympathy by denouncing the carpetbaggers as the cause of Southern corruptions, and was compelling these representatives of the Northern capital either to unite with the planters or leave the South. The labor vote was divided along the line, the color line. They're not using people, but yeah. And the freedmen submerged beneath the wave of race prejudice and economic rivalry. The time was now ripe for open war on the labor of the Black Belt. 7 states had been, quote, redeemed for labor domination under the leadership of carpetbaggers and scallywags via Virginia, North Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, Tennessee, and Arkansas and Texas. This had been accomplished by unifying the white majority and suppressing the black vote by intimidation or economic pressures. It was now planned to move on the states where black majority was such that only force could dislodge them. 4 states in 1874 remained under Reconstruction governments: Louisiana, Mississippi, South Carolina, and Florida. It is said that consolations among white leaders took place throughout the South, and that in May 1874, 40 men assembled on Magazine Street, New Orleans, to arrange for a final drive. They presented all of the secret organizations. They consulted during May and June, and in July, the quote White League was organized under 5 comparatively unknown leaders who were the chosen agents for the secret combination. In less than 60 days after the formation of the New Orleans Central and the White League, and it spread to the farthest parts of the state, had before the end of the year 40,000 members, and was extending in all directions through the South. In Mississippi, the White League began organizing work in 1874. 7 organized armed groups were formed in Vicksburg to control the city's election. The charge here was extravagance in building schoolhouses and, quote, too many N-words in office. Ugh. Armed companies patrolled the city, and yet there was perfect order at the polls. Voters were thus intimidated and kept at home, while in the surrounding counties, some 200 black people were killed. At Clinton in 1875, another blow was struck when the mass meeting and barbecue was being held by people of color. 500 armed white men assembled. Food and wagons were destroyed, mules and horses stolen. Hundreds of black homes were searched, and fugitives were driven away. Grant wrote to the Senate January 13th, 1875, regarding the conditions of Louisiana. He said, on the 13th of April, 1873, the butchery of citizens were committed at Colfax, which a bloodthirstiness and barbarity is hardly surpassed by any act of savage warfare. Unsuperable obstructions were thrown in the way of punishing these murderers and so-called conservative papers. The state not only justified the massacre, but denounced the federal tyranny and despotism, and attempted of the United States officers to bring them to justice. Concerning Mississippi, President Grant said, quote, as to the state election of 1875, Mississippi is governed today by officials chosen through fraud and violence, such as would scarcely be accredited to S-words. In 1874, the president was asked for federal troops in Mississippi and South Carolina. The president refused to extend extra troops, and the result was the Vicksburg riots in Mississippi, where many were killed. Afterward, troops were sent there. In 1876, he promised South Carolina every aid on account of the Hamburg riot. He tried in February 1875 to secure the passage of the bill to protect voters in the United States election, but it did not pass. Nevertheless, before the election of 1876, the House of Representatives asked him to enforce the remaining provisions of the Force Act with the utmost vigor. Grant kept appealing to the Southern people to stop the situation and their own initiative, and make the exercise of his power unnecessary. The South did not listen. Rather, it took note of a strong liberal opposition to Grant in the North, and counted on these liberals to favor withdrawal of that same protection of Southern labor, which, in alliance with Northern business, they had helped institute in 1867. And on the other hand, the South sensed the willingness of big business, threatened by liberal revolts, labor upheaval, and state interference, to make new alliances with organized Southern capital. If assured that the tariff banks and national debt, and above all, the new freedom of corporations, would not be subjected to mass attacks. Such a double bargain was more than agreeable to Southern leaders. During the last session of the 43rd Congress in 1875, another federal election bill, drawn so as to put Congress in control of the national election, was introduced. The Speaker of the House, James G. Blaine, prevented its passage. He was a candidate for the Republican nomination in 1876 and was afraid that the bill might defeat him. He told Lynch, the representative of color from Mississippi, that the passage of the bill would defeat the Republican Party through the country. But he was confident, on the other hand, that if a solid South resulted from the failure of to pass the bill, it would make solid North in opposition. It did nothing of the sort. It did not prevent the South, solidified by the determination to disenfranchise black people, and it did leave a North hesitating between democracy with black voters and plutocracy with white supremacy. In South Carolina, the situation was a little more difficult for the mob because of the efforts at reform that were being made by the Republicans. Despite Chamberlain's administration and the efforts at reform, the Democrats determined to carry the election of 1876 by force. Hampton, shortly after the year, went to Mississippi to look after his large planting interests in the Wazoo Delta. He returned to South Carolina in 1876 at an earnest solicitation. Butler and Gary formed Confederate generals. Their plan of campaign was clear. Every Democrat must feel honor bound to control the vote of at least one black person by intimidation, purchase, keeping him away, or as each individual may determine how he may best accomplish it. Never threaten a man individually. If he deserves to be threatened, the necessities of this time requires that he should die. A dead radical is very harmless. A threatened radical, or one driven off by threats from the scene of his operation, is often very troublesome, sometimes dangerous, always vindictive. In the month of September, we ought to begin to reorganize black clubs, or pretend that we have organized them, and write letters from different parts of the county, given the facts of organization, out from presidential reasons. The names of black people are to be withheld. Those who join are to be taken on probation, and are not to be taken into full fellowship until they have proven their sincerity by the voting our ticket. Murders and massacres of innocent men of opinions sake, or on the account of color, have been to put recent dates and of too frequent occurrences to require recapitulation or testimonies here. All are familiar with their horrid details, and only wonder being that so many justify them or apologize for them. Quote, the scene of Hamburg, he wrote to the governor of South Carolina, as cruel, bloodthirsty, wanton, unprovoked, and as uncalled for as it was, is only a repetition of the course that has been pursued in other states within the last few years, notably in Mississippi and Louisiana. In September, there was a race riot in Aiken County. There were an unknown number of black people were killed. Some said 15, some said 125. Federal troops intervened. No one ever knew how many were killed, but the best informed men estimated that between 80 to 125 lost their lives. In Charleston County, black people in October killed 5 white men and wounded 16 others. Meantime, deliberate fraud carried the election in 1876. There was cheating, intimidation, bribery, and repeating in voting, especially in Edgefield and Lawrence County. At Edgefield, several hundreds of armed men were ready to take possession of the courthouse, and black people were kept from voting. When the black leaders, with several hundred followers, marched to the courthouse to vote, The white leaders, quote, ordered his men to pack the steps and corridors so that entrance would be impossible. When black people protested to General Rugger, he asked Gary to let black people vote. Gary refused and was reported to have replied, quote, by God, sir, I will not do it. I will keep the compact I made with you this morning, that white men and black people should vote at separate boxes. Gary's doctrine of voting, quote, early and often, changed the Republican majority to 2,300 in Edgefield to the Democratic majority of 3,900, thus giving Hampton a claim to the office of governor. It was Edgefield's majority alone which gave Hampton a chance to claim to have been elected, the opportunity which he utilizes so well. It will be recalled that the tissue ballots were used in the heavy black counties for the purposes of having the white men to vote several tickets at once by folding them all together in the way to have them dropped apart in the box. The law provided on closing the polls that if there were more ballots found in the box than there were names on the polls list and the ballots should be returned to the box, and one of the managers should draw out the access to be destroyed. It is needless to say that the Democrat white manager did the drawings and black people used to be very much surprised that he always drew a thick Republican ticket to be burned. We all went on each other's bonds, and it became a joke, causing great amusement that Creighton Matheny, who did not own $10 worth of property, had signed bonds to the extent of $20,000. In truth, the whole performance was perfunctory, and in many respects, a laughable travesty on law. Of it, they had attempted to put us in jail. I am sure few or none of us would have acquiesced, and we would have probably killed every obnoxious radical in the courtroom and town and gone to Texas or some other hiding place. In an hour we had departed and gathered up our camps. Followers were on our way home. In Lorne County, the Democratic majority was 1,112, as against a Republican majority of 1,077 in 1874. To catch the unwary black person, the Democrats counterfeited the Union Republican ticket in various ways. Some ballots were handed by the picture of Hayes and Wheeler, but carried the name of no presidential candidate. Instead, it carried the name of Hampton for governor, along with Republican county candidates. In this way, Wade Hampton became governor in South Carolina, but with specific promise to protect black people in his political rights. After 1877, the Southern gentleman made no attempts to keep the promise. 17 Republican representatives in the legislature from Charleston were expelled and Democrats replaced. When in a special elections thereafter, all sorts of fraud and intimidation kept the South Carolina black people from voting. The white South Carolinians who went through the period and was violently partisan says of the election of 1876, it is not now denied, but admitted and claimed by the successful party that the canvass was systematically conducted with the view to find occasions to apply force and violence. The occasions came and the methods adopted had their perfect work. The result is known, but must be stated here for historical purposes purely. By a system of violence, the coercion and raging through all possible grades, from urgent persuasion to mob violence in election was won by Democrats. It has been charged by the Rhodes and others that there was deliberate exaggeration and misinterpretation concerning these outbreaks and atrocities. This might have been true in some cases, but not one can read the mass of testimonies and various congressional reports and other sources without being convinced of the organized disorder and conspiracy that accompanied this revolution. The majority report of the Triple K Committee says, obedient citizens, they cannot be considered who themselves complain of bad laws, excuse or encourage the masked and armed mobs that override all laws, brave and magnanimous enemies, even they cannot be reckoned, who permit the remnants of rebellious feelings and antagonism of race or the bitterness of political partisanship to degrade the soldiers of Lee and Johnston into the cowardly midnight prowlers and assassins who scourge and kill the poor and defenseless. Whew. Even the Minority Report admits that, quote, we do not intend to deny that bodies and disguised men have in several states of the South been guilty of the most flagrant crimes. And this same Minority Report voices the object of the revolution. But whenever the party shall go down, as go down it, that doesn't make sense, at some time, not long in the future, that will be the end of the political power of black people among white men on this continent. Men in the, oh my gosh, I don't know this word. Wish I had a better time at pronouncing things. But it just messes with my dyslexia. I think that's why I have a hard time pronouncing things. Oh my God, I didn't say D. That's Y. Oh my gosh, a state of temporary wildness, delirium, or violent, irrational excitement. So it's PHREN, frenzies. I can't say it. I tried. It won't let me say it. Of political passions may shut up their eyes to this fact now, but it will come at any time when black people shall cease to be a party necessity in the politics of this country. Thousands of Republicans even now hate him for his insolence and for his arrogance and in the ready self-assertion of his newfound rights and privileges. The truly sincere and rational humanitarian looks with sorrow upon the future status of the poor, deluded black people. Oh my gosh. For in the near state of things which is to come, when the two great parties which now exist shall have passed away, he sees either the exodus or the extinction of this disturbing element, disrupting elements of social and political conditions of the more powerful race. Systematic efforts was made during the whole period of Reconstruction to prevent black people from bearing arms. First, there was a demand that black federal troops be immediately disbanded and moved from the South. Then the white militia searched black dwellings for arms and took them away. The militia organized in the opposite country of South Carolina, Edgefield, were engaged in disarming black people. They created great discontent among the latter, and in some instances, they had offered resistance. In previous expecting tours of South Carolina, much complaint reached me of the misconduct of these militia companies towards black people. Some of the letters of the most intelligent and well-disposed came to me and said, quote, what shall we do? These militia companies are heaping upon our people every sort of injury and insult unchecked. Our people are peacefully inclined, and we are endeavoring to inculcate good feelings, but we cannot bear this treatment much longer. Many are beginning to say, we have been patient long enough. We are free men now, and we have submitted to such usage as long as we can. And again, they ask, what shall we do? I assured them that this conduct was not sanctioned by the United States military authorities, and that it would not be allowed. While black people was in power, most of the southern states organized black militia. In South Carolina, 96,000 were thus nominally enrolled, and others in Louisiana and Texas in the militia and in the police. Nevertheless, the Reconstruction governors were afraid to use these militias, lest they start race wars, and the effort to arm and equip them efficiently was silently opposed. Usually, it resulted in that disarmed and unsuspecting black people were set upon by white forces superior in numbers, armed and disciplined, and with little chance of self-defense. Meantime, the new power appeared upon the scene, and rather the old power of government paralyzed by the Civil War began to reassert itself and effectively stop Northern federal dictatorship to enforce democracy in the South. This was the Supreme Court. Johnson had no chance to make appointments to the Supreme Court, although he had long relied upon that court to overthrow Reconstruction. The court, however, hesitated before the overwhelming public opinion. In 1870, Northern big businesses designated 2 railroads and corporation lawyers from Pennsylvania and New York for appointment. It was charged that they were purposely put on the bench in order to reverse the legal tender decision and protect the bondholders in collecting at par debts contracted with paper money was at a discount of 30% to 60%. At any rate, they, together with one other appointment made in 1872 to 1874, changed the complexion of the Supreme Court. When Waite was appointed Chief Justice over the protests of Charles Sumner, the Reconstruction Court was ready for the appeals concerning the laws to reinforce the 14th and 15th Amendment. It is significant that the very center of Northern capitalist power, which protected and buttressed the new monopoly of big business, turned and, with the same gesture, freed land and capital in the South from any fear of control by black people or white labor. These cases on appeal reached that tribunal in 1876. Reverdy Johnson, Henry Stansbury, and others had striven to bring this to pass. They rely upon the court to do what Democratic members of Congress had failed to accomplish. And the court, through a process of reasoning, let me do something real quick. Where was I at? The courts, through the process of reasoning, very similar to that of Democratic legislators, depriving and enforcement legislations of nearly all its strength when it renders its decision in the case of United States versus Reese and United States versus Cruikshanks. The 15th Amendment of the Constitution did not confer the right of suffrage. The court concluded in the first case, the power of the Congress to legislate at all upon the subject of voting at state elections rests upon this amendment and can be exercised by providing a punishment only when the wrongful refusal of receiving the vote of the qualified elector at such election is because of his race, color, or previous conditions of servitude. In the Cruikshanks case, the court declared that the right of suffrage is not a necessary attribute of national citizenship, but that exemption from discrimination in the exercise of that right, of the account of race, etc., is the right to vote in the states comes from the states, but the right of exemption from the prohibited discrimination comes from the United States. The first has not been granted or secured by the Constitution of the United States, but the last has been. 14th Amendment prohibits a state from denying any persons within this jurisdiction of equal protection of the law. But this provision does not, in any more than the one which precedes it, and anything to the rights which one citizen has under the Constitution against another. The equality of the rights of citizens is a principle of republicanism. Every republican government is in duty bound to protect all its citizens in the enjoyment of this privilege, if within its power. That duty was originally assumed by the state, and it still remains there. The only obligation rests upon the United States is to see that the state do not deny the rights. Right. This the amendment grants, but no more. The power of the national government is limited to the enforcement of the rights guaranteed. I might stop here. Let me stop here. So, even though these laws are passed, they still formed coalitions in committees, whiteness, to destroy and to intimidate the black vote. So the black vote never really got the power that they were scared of, because they kept it down because they were so fucking scared about it. Because they wanted to keep their white primacy going, and they didn't want black people or people of color to engage in any type of power like that. So yeah, let me do this first. I'll get to the page real quick. 760. Oh, okay. I will. Hold on. I'm going to add a bookmark though real quick. Oh my gosh, I forgot to delete all these. Okay, what'd you say? Look at the top test. It's sad. The sad part is living in the South. I know most of us still think this way. Yeah. It's like all white people till no white people, and listening to this makes me want to yell. Yeah, I agree. Thank you for participating. Anybody else want to participate? Yeah, this is just more solidification of why we are the way we are now. You know what I mean? It really shows us like all these things, because some of these things are like still prevalent. Like when Trump got his first election, they blamed, they're writing more people in. They're doing the whole excuses that the white people did against black people to enforce the power of whiteness and these white supremacists to be engaged in the power of the government. So yeah. So it's just more shit, you know, not regulating to black people to have high powers inside the government. That's why the whole government needs to be just like, we just gotta overthrow it. It's gotta be no more. It's the Constitution, the democracy, the so-called democracy, the republic here needs to fall. It's gotta fall. It needs to fall. So, all right. Well, if no one else has anything else to say or doesn't want to come up, I will go ahead and close it out. I appreciate the engagement and the interactions. I appreciate it. All right. Have a good one.